Good morning. Welcome to Investigator News, and I'm your host, Ellie. We're doing a week-long series on Ukraine and what I've been able to find out over the years. And today I have, I want to say a special guest, but it's emails and basically turned into a chat back and forth that I had with this gentleman. And he's a veteran of the CIA, FBI, and he's got a lot of knowledge of, he's worked in Ukraine um, and other places, and he's very knowledgeable of what's going on. And, I come to find out he knew a lot. I knew a lot of what he knows and what I've learned from Eve. Uh, and so that's what I'm going to do the show on today. I'm going to read the messages that me and him sent back and forth. And I think you'll find this very interesting. And of course, subscribe to us and share this with friends and family. I think they'll get a very good outlook of what's really going on over there in Ukraine. And of course, I have doubts sometimes in myself, but when I talked to this man, I realized I was on the right track. And me and Eve's on the right track, but Eve's over there. Eva, I'm sorry, and some of the other reporters that I've been using. And so it really put everything in perspective, and it kind of backed up what I've been saying, and it made me feel good. I was like, yes, I'm right. Pat me on the back. I got it right. So, Karen, how was your birthday? Everybody was sending you happy birthday wishes, and you weren't even here for the happy birthday wishes. So, we're going to get Nick to spank you for it. You didn't show up. She said she played hooky. Shame on you. You could have came in and got all the birthday wishes and said, "See ya, I'm going to go party." But no, you played hooky. You just didn't want us all to you didn't want to hear me sing. That's all. I didn't sing. I just said I wasn't going to send you any stinky monkeys. So it's all right. Um, so with that, everyone, I want to get going on this. It ended up being right around an hour-long conversation. And he really didn't want to go much further than that. And I thought, no, I think we would be, well, I could have went on for 2 hours with this man. I did talk to him, and I didn't grab that part, just private stuff. Um, uh, so, um, so I'm going to get on with it and let you guys just listen to what this gentleman has to say. And you'll see that he's backing me up a lot. And so your daughter cooked for you, huh? Well, that's good. What she should be up having her feet up, and you should be cooking. Did you get cake? I hope you got cake and ice cream, double chocolate with chocolate chips and chocolate ice cream. So, hello, Susan. Everybody's finding us again. So, I'm going to get going on this. And if anybody's late, they could just back it, they can listen to it again. Um, so, I want to really get going on this. And now he told me he wouldn't give me his, well, I know his name, but he said he didn't want me using his name. He said to use Mark Wilson. And so, Ukrainians, this is how I started. This would be my message. Ukrainians have had a lot of support from the CIA, and with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan, and our ability to plant stories and put out information that would create the narrative that we wanted was remarkable back in the day. And this was pre-internet days when they literally were getting articles planted in magazines, newspapers, and other publications, where the editors of the magazines once believed that the CIA was nefarious influence on the world. And the CIA was trying to get information in their magazines. And in fact, and the fact of the matter is we did. And they didn't know um, They didn't know that it was false information. Now, I have told my viewers about this, and it's something that I have discovered. And I said, but I'm very pleased to be speaking with you. And you're a guest that offers valuable and necessary insights on the current situation in Donbass and Ukraine, and even other places that Putin seems to be overtaking. Also, the media portrayal, or rather misportrayal, of what is taking place. I do want to talk about your own history and your own work, but right now I just want to start with the basic question. If you had to explain your average, let's say, one of my viewers that doesn't understand or is confused, who has been deceived by Western corporate media or mainstream media on what is happening in Ukraine, and some of what would you explain to them, and about what's happening regarding Russia's military operation there, and anything else you might think is relevant. Okay. Boy, folks, it took me a long time to think on these questions. I was like, I don't want to sound stupid or sound like I'm from Arkansas. So this is how he responded. This is a problem long developed, or it's been coming for a while. But it's almost like the United States was born needing something to do and decide to provoke this because there's no rational explanation for it. This decision is constantly provoking Russia and portray Russia as this big boogeyman, this enemy that must be stopped. And when you go back, I was one of the early ones to call out the lies surrounding Trump and the Russia collusion from the very beginning, because I knew, because I had a friend on the inside that with the intelligence community, and that it was flagged it to be to me this way, and just without sense. But the West always needs, it's like Hollywood. You need a villain to tell a story. And so Russia becomes this convenient villain, and Putin. And so the narrative, Putin becomes the source of all evil. Worse than Hitler, worse than Stalin, worse than Pol Pot. And the guy didn't even have a bloody count to match, and they're not even close on what they're claiming. And yet he must be stopped at okay, he must be stopped at any for without regard to reason and consequences. And I used to be involved with scripting military exercises. So there's a lot of, when you look at the US with NATO and Yukon European Command exercises along the borders of Russia, and it's always portrayed that NATO is defensive organization. Well, that's a bunch of crap. And when you can see that they shrugged, they scrubbed the websites. But shortly after the war began on the special military operations, on the 24th, the war on the Yukon website, you could find Yavoriv base. That was the base in Western Ukraine that was hit. And it was hit by Russia the third week of the war. And on this Yukon website, they described doing cyber warfare and training. And it explicitly stated that it was offensive operation. Okay, so there goes the NATO. It's just about defense, the Marine Corps, and a video up showing their troops in an amphibious landing craft on the shores of Ukraine. Is an exercise is it? How in God's name that this is defensive exercise, I never understood. So I always like to try to look at it from a standpoint of what do the Russians think? Because if I'm a Russian military analysis, or if I'm an intelligence officer, I'm looking at this saying, it's not pretend. This is not a game. This is not an exercise. The United States has a genuine plan to attack and to invade. And you've got to make that assumption very quickly. You can't assume now that they're just kidding, because they're not kidding. Look over the last 30 years. The only country in the world that have launched more military operations against other countries. The United States, if you doubt that, go ask the Iraqis. They got the treatment twice. The Afghanis, they got it. The Panama's people. Is it Panamanians? And let's go back 42 years of Grenada. So don't forget the folks in the Baltics and Syria. Oh, and Libya. So it's really a list of death and destruction. And it's not produced peace and tranquility or angels. So this was, I don't know if it was, I think someone had come up with a plan um, to do this. Is it, he's not, okay, he or myself or generals, okay, let's encourage Ukraine and go and take out the rest of Donbass and get all the Russian influences out. And I don't think they counted on the fact that Russia would push back. He's long winded, folks, when he types. And so what I put down next is America's histories of invasions and bombings to sovereign nations. How could you please compare, in light of how Russia is conducting its military operations in Ukraine versus how America conducted invasions and bombings in other countries? So if you're just coming in, I'm reading emails and text messages, not text, Facebook messages back and forth with this gentleman. And we did a lot of it email. And then towards the very end of our conversation, I basically we Facebook back and forth. And so I'm talking to him, and this is a veteran CIA FBI guy, and he really has a lot to say. So when I asked about conducting invasions and bombings on other countries, this was his response. That's what really is interesting. For a couple of months away, both Andrei Matinov and myself have been pointing out the United States really has not fought a genuine foe. Somebody could fight back. And since World War II, or let's say the Korean War, Vietnam even, doesn't even really count as in Vietnam. They were not up against an air force. They had the United States, they really didn't fight that many engagements against the North Vietnamese. And most of the attacks were against the Viet Cong. But now all of a sudden here's Russia going up against a real army. And of course, the Ukrainian army has been trained and outfitted by NATO and in large measures since 2014 and earlier. And what's fascinating to watch is watching the U.S. generals who appear on television talking about how bad, how slow, how inept the Russians were. And I just did a simple comparison. I looked at how long it took the Nazis in the world um, in World War II when they started the invasion on June 21st, 1941. And how long did it take them to get to uh, Kiev? And and then he goes on to say, hopefully he can type this out right. Uh, he said, sorry, but a real pet peeve. If you watched all of these Western media analysis, they're calling it, I mean, Kiev, and it's Keeve is how he's. And I understand, at least according to Google translation, is the Russian pronunciation of the Ukrainian, um, of the Russian pronunciation. Now, the Ukrainian pronunciation is like uh, Kyiv, Kyiv, yeah, or Taiv. And so, isn't it curious that Russia claims that Kyiv is actually a Russian city? And all the Western media is calling it by the Russian name. He says, I think it validates the Russians' points. Just the humor of it underscores the ignorance of people talking about this large measure. Um, but going back to when I compare what the Nazis um, did and getting it to um, what the Nazis did to get it to Kiev. And it took them 7 to 8 weeks, almost 2 months to get to Kiev. And at that point, the Nazis were not trying to avoid civilian casualties. They were not trying to leave the cities and the villages intact. They were steamrolling the place, and they were killing wanton. I'm not sure what that means. Um, and then it took another month and a half from to see from the end of July, from August 7th until the end of September to secure Kiev. So you look at what Russia did, and on Kiev's doorstep within a week, 3 days. And I think in that period, they moved so quickly to dominate the landmass that was equivalent or larger than the entire United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Ireland, Wales. And on top of that, they ended up taking out critical military systems. So it took out the ground radar without ground radar Ukrainian Air Force. Wait a minute. Okay, wait a minute. They took out the ground radar without the ground radar. Ukraine Air Force had no ability to do air-to-air intercept because they were dependent upon the ground radar. And Ukraine did not have control of the air, and they didn't really demonstrate any ability to move their military force in a way that you would expect from somebody that had a functioning army. Uh, and the example I use is with Mr. Consular. Mr. Consular was that of Evol, the highly talented tank column that was north of Kiev for a week or two. It is described as 40 kilometers or 40 miles. Nobody seemed to recognize there's a difference between 24 miles and 40 miles, that they kept changing it back and forth. And there is a big difference. And the 10 columns sat there in Western military atmosphere. See, the Russians are overstretched. They can resupply their tanks. They've run out of gas. Was one uh, example that was by the media. But what caught my attention was that a big fat target, like all these tanks lined up, even Helen Keller could shoot. So this is where it sat. They're unmolested virtually. And then, what do I mean by attacking? If if you have a functioning air force that Ukraine claimed with rockets and missiles, bombs, and you should be strafing that column and blowing up tanks and blowing up trucks, or a helicopter with rockets that they claimed they had. It should be flying in and attacking all along that column. If you don't have that, where's your army to bring up your tanks? Your tanks that can attack from the sides. Well, that didn't happen. Well, they've got all those, anti-tank guarded missiles that we've sent, the javelins, and the in-laws. Send your troops out because they've got uh, a 5 to 600 yard range, so you don't have to like sneak up, right? And next, the standoff and fire away, and that didn't happen. And if you step back and say, "Whoa," the Ukraine military is not a real military now. It's been eviscerated and it's been neutered. And Russia was very effective in doing that. And what I mean, ma'am, is that this was a setup by Putin, if you can understand, that they lined up those tanks and it was to see what Ukraine had and whether they would defend themselves or what air power they actually had. The other element that the tank column, I believe, was to create creek bait, just like I have spoken, that would draw a bulk of the Ukraine army into a defensive posture. And they would do this around the city of Kyiv and in the northern suburbs and keep them away from Donbass and resupplying that which apparently succeeded in doing. So hello, Lee, and anybody else that has joined. And I am before I go on with this gentleman, I'm reading him what he is describing as the long length of tanks that that we had seen for many, many days. And so he's really believing that this was a setup. Now he's CIA and FBI, and he's been over there. And so he said it was to bring out what Ukraine had. And obviously they didn't do nothing. So he's thinking that they don't have nothing because they would have struck, they would have reacted. I mean, how wonderful Ukraine would have been if they just blew them all up. And that was something I went into detail after I got all this, and I had a few more questions, so I asked. And so he explained this to me. Okay, so to continue on, he said, on top of it, then the Russians were trying to avoid civilian casualties. He said, didn't they? And he says, how many dictators or horrible rulers, leaders, or whatever would warn people to leave the city and give them time to leave the city? Now, there's a fascinating article in CNN, and God knows, he said, I don't read CNN, listen to, or watch it, but it was about this. And they were interviewing a U.S. specialist described as a U.S. Special Forces soldier. So I'm assuming was Green Beret. And he had joined up and he had fought in Afghanistan and he had fought in Iraq. And he expressed genuine shock of what it's like to be on the receiving end of airstrikes and artillery strikes, because his entire wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were doing that to the little brown people, to the goaters, and they couldn't fire back. And that's like the guy who thinks I'm mixed with martial artist. I know how to fight and all, and you do, and all you do are beating up kids in wheelchairs, and then all of a sudden you get thrown into the real mix of martial arts. And he got his butt kicked. I mean, he quit and he had to withdraw 4 days. And he said, well, he knows the kid. And he said he felt really bad for Kevin. That's the guy's name. And he said he feels really bad for Kevin that he got shook up after being pummeled for 4 days he got pummeled. Now, that being said, that now we've seen the Russians that pummeled for 4 days. Can you imagine what it's like for the people in Donbass? He says, realize this. The people in Donbass who have been bombed for 8 years non-stop without putting up a fight. So you see, after I read through this morning, I thought, that's what I've been saying. And I don't want to cut into this too much. But that's, what I've been saying, that it's been going on and they haven't been going into Russia. So get this, Ukraine has been bombing the people in Donbass for 8 years. My next question was, so historically, 8 years, isn't that long ago? It's long for the people at Donbass in terms of longevity of the war. They've been under, but this has been totally omitted in the corporate media and their reporting. And so I don't want to upset you, but my initial question, I said the Western audiences have been misinformed by corporate media. And of course, because that's what they do best. And so they're going on Facebook's info and other things. And, these people on Facebook, they profile a photo with a Ukrainian flag with the hashtag I stand with Ukraine. And they're not aware, unless they are aware, and they're just incredibly insensitive. So what information do you have that Ukraine has been bombing people in the Donbass of 4 million people for 8 years? And he responded, I don't remember if it was Mark Twain or Ambrose Bierce who said, war is God's way of teaching people about geography. And the average American, if you ask them to find Ukraine on a map, they would say it's probably in southern or western part of the United States. They don't know their history, these young people of today. And when they do the man or a woman on the street interview here with different shows, they don't even know who the vice president of the who the vice president is over in either Ukraine or any other of those countries over in even Europe. The ignorance about just how basic they really know. Who's in charge of politics? They don't know. They've asked questions, who's fought in World War II? No idea. So we're talking about 80 of Americans with the conflicts like this, start, and they're initially televised. Cable news networks are showing it and popping up on social media. Then everybody wants to pretend that they are in the know, and they exhibit enough information to be dangerous, but really have no understanding of the history or the context. And you try to explain this to people, you get accused of being, oh, you're a tool of poop, you're a Russian lover. No, I just believe in the facts, and the facts are the facts. And oh, and we have done very convenient and a deceitful job of convincing the American people that Russia is evil and Putin is particularly the worst man in the world. And I've come to the conclusion a real reason for anger directed at not at Putin, but by political types in the United States. It goes to the heart of the matter. And Putin will not allow Russia to be raped of its resources. That's the bottom line. Uh, and he didn't answer my question. And I was thinking, do I will I insult him if I re-ask it? So I just went on to something else. So I said, Syria, prior to 2011, a Western media, the leadership praised President Assad as a reformer, an open-minded performer, bringing good things to Syria. And then soon as the war on Syria started, boom, everything changed, just like their characterization of President Putin, the vilification of these leaders. And of course, any leader really that's in the crosshairs. The U.S. and its allies actually, I was going to ask you about that. So now we're discussing this on how you just based on President Putin's speeches alone. How would you characterize him? Uh, is he a lunatic? I mean, I don't believe it because I've listened to him, but I would like to get your perspective. His answer, well, that was another thing that strikes. Um, when all of this was heating up and I was taking the time to watch his speeches and his addresses, there was, I wish to God we had someone like that in charge of our own country right now. Because frankly, he was rational, he was reasonable, and he was very direct. He was very informed, he was very coherent and articulate. And so that was a complete opposite picture that was painted in the West of some snarling madman that like Hitler in the movie Downfall, yelling at people, pounding on the table, you telling generals to get in there and take over the world, and this narrative that's been created in the West that Russia is intent on putting together a Soviet Union again and reestablishing the communist empire. Wait a second, they're not communists predominantly uh, anymore. Communists are a minority party in Russia. And okay, number one, and when I tried to point out, well, Putin is actually an Orthodox Christian, but not just any Christian, a very devout Christian. And no, he's not well. Yes, we know that. Yeah, but he ignores that. And within him ignoring it, it shows his strength. I think Putin has raised some very legitimate questions about the West and how it's just falling apart. And I, in fact, think one of the driving forces for the criticism is the homosexual influence in the US that the media is portraying. And they're pushing back against Russia just on that very issue. They have no reason to try to paint Russia as a real country with some real interest. They're trying to pursue it as a security issue. So this disconnect, trying to bridge bridge it, because I have no I've been a media talking head, and it started in 1996 for a while, and I've been effectively banned for the media for the last 10 years. I'm not allowed um, on any of the video platforms, but I've never seen this level of propaganda and so deliberate and so deliberately suppression of alternate news, alternate views. And going on right now, the only thing I contributed that we can attribute to this corporate control of the media, that there it's become a money making business without regard to the truth, without regard to actually informing people that they've lost their way. And as a result of the American people are the ones that suffer. They can just easily be led around social media outlets like this podcast of yours, provide an alternative, and it does reach it does reach a few people, like you said, but think about it. You'll eventually you're going to get hundreds, if not more. Uh, and why do I believe this? Because you're true with your facts, and I thank you for that, ma'am. And it's enough, but it's totally effective in encountering propaganda. So now, what I ask next, the uphill battle that we are waging in simply trying to get people to consider a different perspective exercise in critical thinking. Step away from the dominant corporate narrative and Syria since 2014. I saw how corporate media worked in the wrong information. The small ones were reporting almost verbatim the same lies, and would literally be seeing something in Syria, in Aleppo, or elsewhere. They'd be reporting the opposite, you know. I found reporters in Syria saying different, and I'm sure you noticed this. And I think it would apply to reporting on Ukraine as well as Syria. What they did often was sources say, or media activists, and often didn't even give names to the people, the times, or what they did. And sometimes it even looked photoshopped. I remember New York Times report, I think it was on Eastern Ghouta, and they named three people, three, maybe four people. And I also looked up their names, and I found them very quickly on Facebook. And within minutes, their alliance to Al Qaeda, ISIS, and these were supposed to be neutral people and reporters. And then we have the famous white helmet, sir. We have Aleppo Media Center. All in these sources were funded by the West. And I would know this is true. And this time I was promoting um, an anti, the West were promoting an anti-Russia, anti-Syria, pro-Al Qaeda, fuzzy rebel kind of narrative. I think we're seeing the same reporting on Ukraine. Boy, I had bad writing. Oh, now I feel bad. So he responds, yeah, no, this is a continuation of that playbook. I mean, the one who flagged Asa Hurst, the fact that, the sarin gas that was completely contrived, it didn't happen. And I hope your viewers understand this. The sarin gas was completely contrived. It didn't happen. and as presented as then side dug into, confirmed um, that they had other sources of information. And without it, it didn't divulge the actual source or the psi, but they, not to say that it wasn't being used as an excuse to try to bring in the U.S. military intervention. And now, thank God, that Russia did intervene in Syria back then, because the United States was arming the rebels, the Syrian Islamics, the radicals, not just then, but then all the way through. And people wanting to allow Assad, they were genuinely sending it to Islamic radicals. And that goes back to even Benghazi. That's part of the reason Benghazi covered up what happened there, because Benghazi was the shipment point for staging point for some of those weapons. And David Petraeus made a trip to Turkey on September 4th of 2012 to tell the Turks, okay, we got to back off and stop providing these weapons flow right now, because we don't want it to interfere with Barack Obama's reelection. And that's where Chris Stevens, ambassador, was in Benghazi to meet with Turkish counselors from their embassy and to say, okay, shut it off about that's where this all was. This is just one more example of this desire of the United States to intervene in the process of intervening, not making the world a better place. I'm literally a child of this generation, and I was born in 1955, about the time that we're overthrowing the elected leader of um, of Iran, and then followed by ousting the president in Guatemala. And the United States has a long litany of interfering in affairs of other governments in order to make it bend to our will. And yet, the ones that we always cite as the reason we're doing this is because then the Soviets and now the Russians are trying to take over the world. It's always Russia, Russia. We're trying to prevent that um, now with democracy and truth. It's it's their lie, and that may be one benefit out of Ukraine, apart from the terrible carnage which is going on, which is a horror. And it's the United States hypocrisy on this that is finally fully exposed, and the United States is eventually going to pay a terrible price for it, because this effort to impose sanction on Russia has blown up the United States like nobody ever imagined this. And one going to continue to beat us down in the streets of the states. Wow. Okay. So then I asked that he wanted to go back, and he made a reference to the carnage that's going on. So Western media is presenting, what Russia is doing in Ukraine, its military operation, and you already outlined it's a very strategic, and they moved with precision and no targeting military targets, not intentionally, to my knowledge. They didn't deliberately target civilian infrastructure, but the way the Western media is presenting it is that Putin, again, with gross care and mischaracterization, some sort of genocidal maniac is just slaughtering civilians, and there are civilian casualties. But this actually brings me to my next question, sir, and that is, we saw Syria where terrorists occupied schools and hospitals and militarized them. Uh, so are the Ukrainian and Nazi forces doing um, when doing so? And the Donsk and the Donbass and the DPR in March, with the media delegating, we went down, I'm sorry, we, AKA my reporter Ava, went down to Vonovaca. There at the hospital, it was badly damaged. And she told me what she was seeing. But what two French media outlets, when they issued their report, did not include the chief physician. And I don't think that even the Western media did that either. But there was a chief physician from that hospital saying specifically, Ukrainian forces had occupied when leaving, mined it, and the forces occupied the school or the hospital and militarized it and shot from it. Does that not render it a target? Okay, so what he answered was, sure does. I mean, this is Ukrainian operation. They recognize that they're going to fight from a defensive posture because they lost their offensive capability. So they can do is find holding action part of it. And I think it had helped from the former organization, the CIA, from the U.S. military, of embedding themselves in civilian areas in order to, one, cause the Russians to hesitate in attacking, and two, if the Russians do attack, to be able to gain some propaganda value, saying, see, the Russians just wantingly killing civilians. Okay, so this is what I said. One of the comments is Russian forces have been in Ukraine for the past 8 years. What would you say to that? It is not true. No, this is a lie. This is a falsity pushed by Western media. And it has Russia provided support to the people in the nets and hunts republics. They sure as they should put the United States to provide support to a variety of countries where we believe security interests are at risk, but just can't get my mind wrapped around why so many Americans refuse to acknowledge that the country that is right on Russia's border merits Russia's attention. There they got this notion that Russia is doing something completely, would be one of the thing Russia was trying to impose its will on these states, but no, they're not. It would be if you imposed its will on Argentina, that's a bit of a hike. But this is right next door. And when we look at the American history that's going back to the Monroe Doctrine, and I hate to say it, I don't know what the Monroe Doctrine is. I should have looked it up. Maybe that'd be a question for William for tomorrow night. But by God, it didn't matter. It not even had it to be on our border if it was anywhere in the hemisphere. The general vicinity, like Argentina, were going to do something to stop the outside influence. I'm always one about consistency and complete hypocrisy on the part of the United States. And Russia, I'm actually surprised at the restraint Russia has shown over the years. And it speaks to something, to the quality of the people that he loves and the Donbass that were able to hold off a Ukrainian army for over this period, because the army was apparently that they were getting prepared to do if they had rolled in there with all their full force and might. They should have been able to have taken the place years ago, and they didn't. And I think a part in way, it could be in a preview of what could have happened in the United States. I know this sounds a little far-fetched and crazy, but what undid the invasion of Donbass was the members of the Ukrainian military who were from that area. They sympathized with it and they defected and went over to the militia side and fought back. That completely stalled the army and the way the political split is going in the United States. I could see such a thing developing because there used to be common ground, a common belief. Now sharp is sharply divided. And the other things that America once stood for is being trashed on a daily basis. So, there a fear that we're watching and it could take place on the Donbass border. It could be a preview of coming attractions. Now, I really didn't understand that. I was reading it and I had to reread it again. And um, so I said, one of the themes out of the Western media is um, that you might have already touched on a little bit. So I apologize for repeating that the Russians has taken a huge losses in Ukraine and actually very um, an incident related to which I'm sure you're aware of this. Four-star General McAfee, I think his name. Um, I think that's his name. I don't know anything about video games, but he tweeted a video game footage claiming Ukrainian forces had shot down a Russian plane. Later, they retracted and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was mistaken." How does a four-star general make this kind of mistake? Now, I meant to tell you guys about that. Um, and it was a friend of mine's son that showed me this. He said, "Look at how dumb these generals are when they're posting, um, like, what's the name of that game? World of War, and there's another one, I think, a combat game." And so this general seen it on a video on YouTube, and he thought it was real, so he posted it. And it was a four-star general, and he couldn't tell the difference. Hi, Sherry. So I don't, this is how he responded. I don't think he knowingly that it was taken in the video. I don't know for a fact about 3 weeks into a special uh, opera, special military, AKA war, that the United States was reporting Russian casualty figures. This was based on the Ukraine telling us, which is shocking because the way intelligence is supposed to work, we get Ukraine giving us information and is called the liaison reporting. So that's one source. But we have intercepts, we intercept communications. We have the ability with the overhead imagery to add drones to see what's actually going on the ground. So a way of intercepting what's going on. So the Russian side, so there would have been other means, other ways to verify, double check, or come up with independent numbers. And they didn't do that. He said, so they were reporting like 15,000 Russians were dead. And all of a sudden, I got this from a friend who was directly involved in some of the intelligence briefings, said just literally overnight, Defense Intelligence Agency went, never mind, and they just flipped it completely. So instead of the 15,000, now it was far less. And that's because suddenly it came to their own realizations. They had been fed a bunch of crap by the Ukrainians and have had a lot of support from the Central Intelligence Agency. I got to work on one of these covert action programs back in 1985. It was against the Soviet Union um, and in Afghanistan. Our ability to plant stories and put out information that would create the narrative that we wanted was remarkable back then. And the pre-internet days, and that we didn't have any of the tools the internet has today, but now that we have it, you would do the old-fashioned way, hire a uh, videographer to shoot a video and get an actual reporter to write a story that they had to type it out on a typewriter and then submit it to a particular publication. We were literally getting articles planted in magazines where the editors of the magazines believed that the CIA was a nefarious influence in the world and that they believed the CIA was trying to get information in their magazine. And in fact, the matter is they didn't know about any of this. So I've seen that side. So this is an entire media narrative that has been created, and it somewhat looks like a video game. It looks real, and you have to look behind the scenes, and um, and to say, wait a second, where's the beef? Or where's the dog bark? Because you tell me you got a big dog, but you don't. You see a food dish, and I don't hear any bark. If you compare the siege of Stalingrad in World War II, where the Nazis um, were finally surrounded, and von Paulus was pleading for help, and von Manfred, I think, was leading the effort to break through the Soviet ring around that city, failed to do so. The Nazis tried to break through to rescue the people, and what happened to Mariupol? There was no tank column coming from the north. And why I mean, if the Ukrainian military is as an effective and confident and brave, uh, where was the counterattack? It didn't happen. There was no counterattack from air power either, no counterattack from artillery. So you actually have to look at the con and what's going on and what should be done. If you have a competent military and military leaders, uh, what's not happening, you should know, tells you right there. The Ukrainian army's ability to effect command and control of mobile forces larger than 150 or say 600 people, it has been eliminated. They can't do it, or they haven't been able to do it so far in the 3 months. We've not seen one single instance where, when Russia starts pulling out out of these cities north of Kiev, it's touted as, oh, they were forced out by the Ukrainians. Or the other day, the Ukrainians have captured the border of Russia. They've broken through north of Markiv. And you look at these guys, and they're out in the middle of the woods carrying, like a blue and yellow totem pole. And that's not usually how it's done, ma'am. I'm going, wait a second. There are actual roads and there are actual border crossings with border guards. If you show me Ukrainians attacking and taking that Russian border, you would be showing border guards. You'd be showing the border. Then I give them credit. But taking the border and then a post that looks like me going out in my backyard with a blue and yellow pole declaring this is the border of Ukraine. I mean, come on, this don't happen. It's nonsense. So, um, so then I went on and I said, well, speaking of some of these nonsense in the media, uh, in Donbass recently, there was a march, and it went back mid-April, slightly after you're aware of the screaming headlines of the mass graves. So this is based on runaway mayor uh, of Mariupol, whose name eludes me, and actually had the audacity to say the worst war crimes of the century, alleging there were these masked pits, and how it's described is reports of 9 to 10,000 people, and a lot of them in one grave. And they provided these fancy satellite images to convince the Western public. And it certainly seems to have convinced a lot of people here, but went to that very spot, and there were orderly graves, and they were grave diggers that appeared. So I asked Eva, my reporter, to speak with them and find out what she could find out. And they were adamant no grave contained, no, that these graves, each grave contained one body buried with dignity in a coffin, including Ukrainian soldiers. And it was said that at the end of each day, they're humans and deserve to be buried quite dignified. And it was clear that this, when you hear a mass grave, that evokes an imagine of this big pit, and that has been discovered in Donbass, and authorities not created by Russia, but it was created by Ukraine, and the forces who killed civilians in Donbass and a military and threw them in mass pits. So anyway, it sounds absurd, but then we have Bucha hopes, and as well as many others that you know. And this is how he responded. The first hoax was the ghost of Kiev, and this was a mythical fighter pilot shooting down 6 or 7 Russian combat aircraft. And then it turned out to, it was a video game followed by uh, the Abuja revelation. And the Russians were there, and again, it was cut for all over. They were rounding up civilians and shooting them. And when I started looking at the images, I finally noticed that the ones lying dead had white armbands around their arm or leg, which symbolizes a Russian sympathizer. When the video emerged, these images emerged of these people with Russian meals or ready to eat food supplies. What soldier in the right mind gives away food and then kills the people, right? And then the fact that the Russians had actually evacuated 2 days before. I started looking on social media because I think you know that the Russians were going around rounding people up and taking them out and executing them on the internet. And it's a social thing, it's a social media thing. And it was still functioning in that area. The thing about it, there's not one tweet, not one video, not one whisper of such event taking place. And only a day after, the mayor of Abuja um, declared it, we're free, we're liberated, free at last, thank God Almighty. Then all of a sudden, these horrific images start to emerge. And you know, that told me in a complete staged event that those were actually dead people. And I think Ukrainians are responsible for killing some of them. And why? Because why would Russians shoot their own sympathizers? And like I said, give them food and know they have a white armband and just kill them. Russians don't do that to their own people. Ukrainian would do that to a Russian. Some of them maybe had died in an artillery strike or had been moved to that location in order to make it appear that the Russians were murderous thugs because of other things. And it didn't make sense. And that Russians have been cautious about taking civilian casualties. and completely destroying an infrastructure that's essential for civilian survival. Though they have not fought this war, the U.S. would always do the shock and awe. We didn't care if we blew up, I remember Fallujah, literally leveled the place. And in Iraq. So, people are having trouble getting their mind around this. And this is the part that was coordinated effort, as if we can portray Russia as this ultimate evil and willing to destroy civilians. And then we'll build support in the West. We are now going into the fourth month of this conflict, and it has failed. They failed that narrative and that covert action, and I believe has now failed. And why it has failed? Because they can't find the story about Ukraine's hardly being reported in the West. The story they put up, the story they were putting up last night in a lot of the mainstream media that featured that only thing on CNN was about a U.S. soldier that talked about an earlier complaining that he had never bombed or strafed like that in his life. And it's really difficult to handle. And then over on Fox News, they had a story about a convicted, some low-level soldier, Russian soldier, for war crimes. And he's going all the way to jail for a very long time. MSNBC, they didn't have a single article about the war. And the only thing was about this gay black female basketball player that's in jail for allegedly drug paraphernalia. So this is a long ways from where you're putting the story on top of the issue and how bad the Russians are, because American people, frankly, don't give a care. And what the media types care about is very little, but they want to make it off to be seen very big. But we haven't even seen that big warrior, Malcolm Nance, the former MSNBC, the guy that is a liar, number one. But apart from it, he was all kitted out in his military. I'm going to go fight for the Roosties. And we haven't heard from him either. And he's backed out. Doesn't recognize this is all the showmanship and not achieving what they wanted, and which is to create a predictable and predicate that would have given NATO the withdrawal to go to do something that's been done over and over again. So, boy, he's long-winded. So many parcels, this is what I said, many parcels with how events played out in Syria and the West, and tried to foment the very pretext you're talking about for them to go full-on bombing Syria, for example. I think probably the most well-known hoax at this point is the Duma alleged chemical attack. And by the way, there's been one in Ukraine recently. And when within 2 or 3 weeks after the allegations spoke with the allegations, there was Syrian girl that spoke with the people and saying, you would have expected people to immediately social media talking about it and talking about and Duma the way they like. I don't know about anything about a chemical attack, but I want to tell you how life was under the Islamics and how they starved us and executed people in the street. And that was the concern again, like if they actually had taken place and just staged the incident and then portrayed a chemical attack, they would have been talking about it, And what I meant by this was there was a chemical attack. And when they were, right afterwards, the reporters were running up and talking to them saying, "Well, what did you think?" And they were like, "Well, we're just glad to be free of the Islamics. We're hungry." And nothing was ever mentioned about the chemical attack. So I got a hold of Syrian Girl and I said, what is this with this chemical attack? And then come to find out it never happened. It never happened. It was false news. So okay, so his response. They weren't but now I don't want uh to take much more of your time, but I want to talk about another elephant in the room. The Western media and whitewashed from the reporting has literally erased the reporting that of course, the Nazis in Ukraine. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, yeah, they have some rogue ones here and there and everywhere, and has them and how strong they are in Ukraine. Eh, I mean, I've seen them in an Adar prison, a former factory that was turned into a prison in the lungs of people, the People's Republic, and the atrocities that were committed against the prisoners of war and torture, uh, execution. And we've seen a lot of the footage coming out of Mariupol where the residents are talking about how they were kept as human shields, both by Ukrainian forces and the Nazis. So, this whole concept of them just being a few bad apples, it was my understanding in complete nonsense because they are effectively embedded with the Ukraine forces and their military. I was not really aware of the Nazi element until about 3 years ago when I was watching uh, a documentary, What Our Fathers Knew. And I suggest your viewers watch this. I believe the title and its features was Jewish attorney from UK who originally came from the second generation. And he's interviewing the sons of Hans Frank, who is the governor of Galway. And this is over in Poland and oversaw the death camps in Poland. And the gala leader of Ukraine, the von Walker. And so you got there the son, and these guys, these men are now in their 70s, and Hans Frank was hung for his war crimes. He eventually hung at Auschwitz because he oversaw the death camps of all um, the death camps to Poland, and it made the visit to Ukraine. During the visit, they show up at one of these commor- commemorations, and they were commemorating a Waffen SS division um, of the Ukraine division that worked with and fought alongside the Nazis. And there's literally this man in his 90s who says to the son of von Walker, "Oh, I remember your father. I wish he was back. He did a great job of cleaning up all this juice." And I'm going to mean that this was a recent. Um, so when I started looking in it, I was shocked. And there will be, and I think, some other news coming out in the next few weeks. For example, some of the members of the Assad battalion, for example, and this may shock you, ma'am, but they were present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. They were flown out by Alexandra Chalupa, and they were brought specifically to help provoke and incite the crowd of people. I am familiar with this, and they got the flight. They got the flight information, the hotel, the information. So it's not made up. And when you try to talk and explain to a lot of times, calling someone a Nazi, it's without actual explaining it and what it entails. These guys are the bona fide Nazis in a sense. They wear the symbols, they wear the embrace of the Nazi imagery, number one. They're tattooed with swastikas. Um, they embrace the Nazi ideology of superhuman or real people, as opposed to the mints and the lower level of subhuman. So what's curious about that is to portray Ukrainians as, Slavic and superhuman, and themselves are Slavs, and other excuses you can't have. The Nazis, because of Zelensky's a Jew, and okay, so you can't have Nazis because of Zelensky's a Jew, and because you would not do that. So that's where I brought up the name of Chaim Rumkowski. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a Jewish elder in charge of the ghetto at Lutz during World War II. He collaborated with the Nazis and facilitated the murders of the Jews. So the notion that a Jew wouldn't get in bed with a Nazi, sorry folks, it's been done. Been there, done that. And it's an old story. It happened just before Zelensky, and is just the latest. Let's just call him a Gayam Rumkowski and the 21st century. Okay, so and so I said, don't don't do predictions, and I'm not an analysis. I'm like a kind of a reporter, and I have my show, and I try to give the voice of the people. And if I may, and if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to, because it's a question that really nobody can answer with clarity. Do you foresee what is happening right now with military operations and everything? The West pumping weapons into Ukraine. And how do you see this ending? The West sending, and he answers, the West sending weapons and sharing intelligence with Ukrainian is like pouring water down a hole. If you send weapon to somebody, there's got to be somebody that could use. And yet what's happening in Ukraine is they're hunkered down, they're in a defensive position, and they come out of this war has progressed the Russians and have actually achieved a good situation where they've been able to concentrate now with the Ukrainian forces. Those Ukrainian forces have been concentrated with drones and flying overhead drones, and can locate them. But then you send both artillery strikes, cruise missiles strikes, and rockets fired aircraft. This process of grinding down the Ukraine military is going to continue. The notion that we're going to share intelligence with the Ukrainians. So what did we say? There are 2 Russian regiments at such location, and what Ukraine is going to do. They don't have the air power to strike. They don't have the helicopters or the fixed wing aircraft, or can they get up and hit those targets without getting shot down. So they're depending on these drones, which make no sense. They don't have armor. They don't have an armor column, so they can send over to crush them. So I call that sending intelligence to Ukraine is like sending a copy of Tolstoy's War and Peace to someone who is illiterate. And all that's good. It may be a paper waiter to sit on, because they can't get anything beneficial. So Russia keeps forgetting about Odessa. And I think Odessa is one of the net major targets of the Russian once the Donbass is secure. They'll finish off the southern coast of Ukraine, and Ukraine is literally completely neutered because they have no economic lifeline. In the South, they're going to be dependent entirely upon the West, to Poland. And in Poland, that is looking at increasingly like they would have to take care of them. And it sounds like they want to encroach upon and take back some of the Ukrainian territory, which belonged to them, and to Poland, such as Lviv. So I think the political fallout from this is going to be interesting because NATO then will be rightly perceived as being reckless, weak, ineffectual. And despite its tough talk, despite wanting to gain members, this is the ability to enlist Finland, Sweden, and it's going to fall apart, even Turkey. And it's not, Turkey's not going to let it happen. Turkey is very, very serious about the Kurdish workers, partly because being harbored and given safe haven in places like Finland, Sweden, even Germany, for the matter. So it has a long-standing complaint against NATO members and facilitating protecting terrorists. They perceive terrorists. So I think it would be interesting to see if Ukraine is talking about trying to mount a new counter offenses. And I'd like to see it because I want, it's not because I want to see death and carnage, but they're so forward. Now, 3 months into this, they haven't shown the ability to do it. So it would be a new magical capability and that they come up with and think it's just another part of information warfare putting out there. Whether in fact or actual, the army is being carved up as we speak. And my understanding. Um, and then I said that in spite of all the rhetoric about the different Western nations sending more weapons, pledging to send more weapons to Ukraine, the significant amount their own weapons have been eradicated. And if I understand correctly, it would take years, perhaps, Ukraine to resupply to the level it had before this military operation. I might be getting that wrong, but the notion that they could simply resupply quickly and train up soldiers to be able to use these weapons, I think is false. And he said now the training aspect is the critical one. For example, is the 155 millimeter howitzer that has been sent. It's a gun that has to be towed behind a truck. And it's important to understand that when you set it up, the artillery piece is like that out of the field, and it starts firing. There's something called counter battery fire. Counter battery means an aerial platform like the Russians have with drone or an aircraft can pinpoint the location of that artillery piece. And then it fires back and it destroys it. So the tactic to combat, to counter the risk of the counter battery fire is this. While you have what they call mobile howitzers and helicopters that are mounted on tank threads, and you're in a position and you fire from the position. As soon as you fire, you drive up maybe 100 yards or 200 yards to a new position, or you drive backwards, or you drive sideways. So you don't stay in the same position firing. So when you're seeing images of fixed artillery pieces firing, that tells you if it's Ukraine, and it tells you they don't have the ability to get out of the way. So you get destroyed. If the Russians tell you they're not worried about Ukrainians firing back, it's because the Russians have the ability to move the equipment. So the United States is not all of NATO. They're not sending their latest, greatest technology and sending their frontline equipment. They're sending hand-me-downs. I don't know if you had a big sister or growing up, but it's like getting your big sister's old ragged clothes, and that's what your mom wants you to wear. But that's what Ukrainians are getting. They're getting the West is a sort of cleaning out its closet, saying, "Oh, let's send Stingers." Um, a Stinger is a 42-year-old miss, so it's like most modern technology availability, and we sent thousands of them. So have not shot down thousands of helicopters, and I think it's the numbers like 4 or 5 tops. So, and even the javelins have been widely uh, 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 derided by some Ukrainian soldiers. It's not working, and now it's because they were not properly trained. They claimed they weren't working, but when checked, it just was the fact they weren't properly trained. And if they're going to train pilots, whether it's a helicopter or a fixed aircraft, you're looking at months of training. And then once trained, where are those aircrafts going to be located and operate? Because Russia continues to show its ability to hit airfields, hit fuel depot, hit ammunition, and military camps where soldiers are concentrated. And that was the pretty much, I know for a fact that the Defense Intelligence Agency was briefing and believed that Russia's going to run out of missiles. Well, the entire U.S. policy is based on, boy, we hope they're going to run out of missiles, which shows you just how pathetic the U.S. intelligence capabilities are. Now we are blinded and we don't know what's really going on inside of Russia. And we added to it by cutting off every bit of the contact and trying to isolate Russia. What we've actually created is a more dangerous situation because now, literally, in the dark about anything that Russia is doing. And in the past, if you had some intelligence assets, whether they were telling the truth or their issue, but at least they had some ability to claim that you had information coming from the inside that you could count on. At this point, they're doing the wrong strategic ways. And then I said, I think people would be interesting. How did you, about your career in the CIA and the State Department, perhaps want to name other government related positions you held? You're currently having a very critical views and analysis, government policies. So this is what he said that his career was about. And so I checked it out, and he's on the up and up. He said he started off in the CIA in 1985. They called the Career Training Program. He said he wound up as a senior regional analysis in Central America, and this was during the Control War. So he was directly involved with trying to counter Soviet subversion of Central America. He got fed up with that and left the CIA in 1989. And Ambassador Morris Busby, who was a coordinator for counterterrorism, asked him to come to work for the State Department. He worked on anti-terrorism assistance training, maritime transportation security, and special operations with the U.S. military. He did 4 years, and they downsized the office. So there was he was a contractor at this point. Citing terrorism was no longer an issue, so he went out in the world as a private contractor. One of the first jobs he actually had to serve on a biologically guard for a CIA female contractor who was going to Ukraine in Kyiv. And there was to protect her from a guy we call Etch or Latch, Vexel, and of the ledger, and of a ledger. And so his consulting business included providing training for the U.S. military special operation forces, doing exercise, and then also financial investigations. Maintained clearances up to about 3 years ago, and was a top secret clearance right into some of the highest level material. And the benefit he had was a result of a career with a pigeonhole, and he worked with intelligence community, both with the DIA and CIA, worked with law enforcement side of the FBI. He was one of the principal liaisons of the FBI and the investigation of the Pan Am 103 bombing. It dealt with transportation security, both the maritime and aviation side. And then he was military special operation forces and was involved over 250 exercises of both scripting and executing. So um, he got to see sort of how the entire piece of sausage is put together, um, from start to finish. And they gave him real insights in deciphering what you see in the public. You know, one of the earliest lessons he said at the end of the CIA was there was a real secret and body in the government agreed upon, and it would leak to the press. But if there was a disagreement over a particular issue, it would leak information. And that was the top secret stuff. And on the front pages of Washington Post and the New York Times. So you're always able to sort of track what's going on by looking at what part is going on in the press, who's saying what, and what's not being said. He said he could say for a fact that if Russia was actually suffering the kind of casualties they were talking about, um, let's see the intelligence community they'd be out leaking and providing actual information, and they're not doing so. And so, not that because it doesn't exist, it's just one of the ways. And to parse through all the garbage that's out there and floating around in the political waters. And that was pretty much it. And I thanked him very much. And um, I, I thanked him for being very honest. And you might have to go back through and just listen to it again. And so basically, this guy, he does speak to a few. I believe he spoke to Ava, maybe, I'm not sure. She's talked to another guy. But we're now seeing CIA starting to come out and let us know what's going on over in Ukraine. And what he said is exactly what we've been saying. This is just one big farce of a war. And this is something that has been going on for 8, 9, 10 years. And it's, and the U.S. and NATO's only making it worse. You know, we heard about a little bit of everything that I've touched on over the last couple weeks, and it really backed me up on what I've been telling you guys. And I told him I hope I could email him again and ask him some more questions. He said I could. Now tomorrow night, if you got any questions, please email them to me or message me on Facebook or even put it down below. And I'll try to get a hold of him and see if he can answer some of them. But I also have William coming on tomorrow night that knows a little bit of military, or he knows a lot of military. So we might be able, with the two of us, be able to answer the questions. Mental health issues, Ed. I think a lot of these shootings are just mental health. And not only that, the crime rate. You know, when you don't police and you don't take guns, if you don't get the guns away from the wrong people, like the gangs, and then it's a free-for-all, you start seeing this stuff. And it's sad. It's sad what's going on in our world. So with that, folks, I thank you for watching. Please subscribe and hit the bell and the like. And actually do a like for this CIA gentleman. And maybe I can get him to come on and talk to you guys. I'm going to try to keep warming up to him, and he's probably watching today, and maybe I can get him on. He's a very busy guy, and he does a lot of interviews for a lot of different news media. So we'll have to see. I'll keep in touch and scroll up and past the story. Two doctor, two patient. Shooter was upset with doctor. Legally bought guns and used shootings 3 days, just an hour and changed before. Were they illegal guns? Because you can't, it depends on, there's certain guns you can walk out of the store with, but for the most part, you got to wait. Well, I don't know. That's here. You'd have to find out gun laws for Oklahoma. So really, you know, it's gonna boil down to, the Democrats go through this every time there's a shooting. What about the shooting today? Where's the Democrats on this? You know, I haven't seen no news yet, though, so I don't know if they're spouting, take the guns again. But they do this, and this is exactly what Parkland shooter dad was saying. They did the same thing to them, and then when they didn't get their agenda the way they wanted it, they walked away from Parkland, and they just don't want nothing to do with the families anymore. Not even the media wants to show up. So it's a game they play every time there's a shooting that fits their needs. But, you know, there are some of the toughest gun laws. They do check. They do run background checks. And a lot of times you don't walk out of the store with a gun. They hold on to it. And if you have anything that comes up that looks suspicious, you don't get a gun. So anyway, I think Mary's away. So subscribe, hit the follow over there in Facebook land, and hit the bell over here, thumbs up, and thumbs up for this young, not young, I think he's 55, so he's older than me. Thumbs up for our CIA guy. I'm glad I was able to get a hold of him this week so that I could bring you, you know, what he had to say. And I totally believe him. And he was seemed very credible. So with that, you guys, we will see you tomorrow morning. It'll be Friday. There's 2 shows. And I've got, like I said, if you got questions, bring the questions tomorrow night. Go back through and listen a little bit during the week. If you had, oh, I wonder about this. So bring it with you tomorrow night, and I'll be able to answer some questions. I got a good show for the morning, and then like a wrap up tomorrow night, I believe, unless I find more that's in my notebook. And then hopefully we'll be done for the week, and we can get on to trivia and then start next week all new. And we'll have all 3 platforms. And I'm asking those on Investigator News 2 that at least add yourself over there on Investigator News Network, because I have a weird feeling that YouTube is going to take the channel away completely. So we're over there on News Network, and I'm trying to mind my P's and Q's to keep it. So with that, folks, we will see everyone tomorrow morning. You have a wonderful Thursday, and if you have this severe weather coming at you, be safe, and keep your pets safe. So with that, God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.